We begin with embattled Republican lawmaker George Santos. The GOP chairman of the House Ethics Committee has now filed a resolution to expel Santos from Congress following that ethics report that found Santos allegedly used thousands of dollars in campaign funds on Botox treatments, trips to Atlantic City, even to pay his own rent, making purchases at designer stores and on the website now known for its adult content. Democratic Congressman Eric Sorensen joins me now to discuss further. Congressman, thank you so much for your time. I want to ask you first, how likely do you see it being that Santos is expelled from Congress at this point?
Well, it sounds like there is more folks in Congress, more of my colleagues that are focused on his fraudulent activity than ever before. Look, from the beginning, I stood at Capitol steps and said that George Santos committed a fraud on Congress. He committed a fraud on his district. And so we need to hold him accountable for that fraud. And so week after week goes on, he continues to vote on the floor of the House, and we need him gone. And now it seems that the Ethics Committee has spoken, and more of his own colleagues are coming forth today saying that he has to go. So I'm hopeful that we can do that right when we get back from Thanksgiving break.
Congressman, what kind of message does it send to the American people that an elected official was able to use campaign donations to fund his own lifestyle, including, as we detailed, those Botox treatments, I mean, these lavish personal expenses, and that he got away with it until this ethics report, came out?
I mean, look, the people I talk with have a growing concern and a distrust for Congress. For instance, here in my district in Western Illinois, I was a meteorologist on television here for 22 years. It wasn't that I said to the voters here, you can trust me. No, it was I earned the trust before I was put on the ballot. OK, and now I'm the representative for this district. We need to make sure that not only our lawmakers, but those who represent us can be trusted. And when they're not, we need to call for them to be expelled and replaced with somebody who can be.
I have to ask you about trust. I mean, one of the reasons some of the trust continues to be eroded is the fact that we are up against the wall on these shutdowns time and time again. We, of course, saw this week that the government narrowly averted a government shutdown. Are you willing to work with the new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, to pass some of those much-needed funding bills in advance so that we don't get up to the wire again, in a couple of months?
Look, I've said from the very beginning that I'll work with anybody as long as we're solving the problems and we're putting people over politics. And I had a great conversation on the floor of the House with the incoming speaker. And look, I'm able to be in Congress today without this anchor or this ball and chain of politics. I'm working across the aisle in a bipartisan district and in a bipartisan way in Washington, and we need that to work. The problem that we have today, though, Elizabeth, is we have too many of the folks that are on the far extreme right that don't want to work with anybody. They just want to cause chaos. I think when we saw the continuing resolution bill come to the floor and you saw this bipartisan path forward, hey, look, today, it's Friday, November 17th. We could have been dealing with a shutdown today where our military service members weren't getting paid, TSA not getting paid, food safety right before Thanksgiving. And so here we are today. The bipartisan path got us through. And I hope that bipartisanship will get us through as we look into next year with a new budget.
Well, and as you point out, the new House Speaker needed the help of Democrats like you to avoid that worst case scenario of the shutdown. Where do you think he comes down in all of this? Was this a win for him, or is he going to be faced with the same fate where that far right kind of rebels up against him again?
Well, look, the House GOP lost a very simple rules vote on this past week where we lost a whole day of voting. Was that his conference saying that we don't like the fact that you're working with Democrats? We'll have to wait and see. But look, I mean, as we get back from Thanksgiving break, we're going to have just a couple of weeks to get a lot of these appropriations through. We're going to need to focus on the FAA, for instance, to make sure that travelers have what they need as we get into the holiday season. So there's a lot that Congress has to do when we get back in the short couple of weeks before the new year. But then we've got to focus on the things like the Farm Bill. I'm on the Agriculture Committee. Our farmers are deserving of a farm bill, and right now politics and playing games with politics is causing problems for not only our farmers, but as we look ahead, are we even going to have that farm bill for next year?
A lot of stalemate, as we talk about too often here on the show. Congressman Sorensen, thanks so much.
Good to be with you, Elizabeth.
Let's bring the big story to our panel. Joining us today, ABC News contributor and SiriusXM radio host Mike Muse, ABC News contributor and former Republican Congresswoman from Virginia Barbara Comstock, Democratic strategist and president of Next Gen America Cristina Tzintzún Ramirez, and ABC News political director Rick Klein. Rick, I want to go back to the George Santos conversation and get your thoughts on how you think this plays out for him. He's already survived an expulsion vote. Is he going to survive another? He's not going to run again, but where does he come down in all of this, Rick?
Yeah, Elizabeth, I don't think he's going to be a member of Congress come, say, December 1st. I think after Thanksgiving, if he hasn't resigned, he's going to be expelled. And I think you see it in the changed position of a number of members of Congress, including the chairman of the House Ethics Committee, who himself is filing this resolution. It is become untenable, impossible for members of Congress to stand behind him. Even Speaker Mike Johnson, holding on to that tenuous majority, he seems to have seen the writing on the wall. He has suggested that everyone should take a look at what's good for the institution of the House. And I think if Santos doesn't resign on his own over the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, he's going to be removed from Congress shortly thereafter.
Barbara, you're a former Republican lawmaker. What would you do? What's your vote on this at this point? Do you have to distance yourself from Santos?
Well, I already would have voted for him and called for it sort of the first day when he came in. And one of the really unseemly things that you've seen throughout all of these speaker votes is George Santos himself was sort of holding out, you know, kind of teasing his support for this or that speaker candidate, really kind of, you know, threatening, gee, I don't know if I'm going to vote for this candidate or not, you know, sort of implying, what are you going to do about my case? And of course, we know Matt Gaetz still has an ethics case pending, and there's certainly Kevin McCarthy has talked about how that started this whole thing. So it is pretty unseemly, and it's long past due for George Santos to be gone, and I'm confident that he will be voted out. There'll be more than enough votes to kick him out and expel him.
I mean, he continues to surprise us. Christina, where do you come down on this? Does it help? Do people associate Santos with Republicans, or is he kind of seen as this separate entity and everyone's willing to distance themselves at this point, given especially these latest allegations, findings in the House Ethics Report?
Well, I think a lot of people see that he has been very tied to the Republican Party. Remember, this isn't the first thing that's come out. This guy came to office making up the most outlandish stories and padding his resume. He supposedly had grandparents that died in the Holocaust, family members that died in 9/11. He supposedly worked on Wall Street. He even made up where he went to high school. And Republicans stood by him that entire time. And now we found out he has a new low, and he used campaign contributions for porn and Botox. And you still, even though you see Republicans now trying to shift course a little bit, you know, MAGA majority speaker Mike Johnson still hasn't said if he's going to support an expulsion measure at this point. So I think ultimately it's going to show that Republicans stood by him way past time that they should have stood by him.
Mike, where do you come down on this? And I'm curious on your thoughts about what it says about the finances in our political system more broadly, that Santos was able to do this in the first place, that he, you know, a lot of these purchases basically were unnoticed until this ethics committee report came out.
Yeah, it's really interesting you kind of went into the finance aspect of it. I think it's a really great question. I think that we have to pay usually the campaign finance committee actually does normally a good job of checking into the expenditures of campaigns. I think if anything, I think there is this assumption that candidates will adhere to the status quo in terms of respecting the rules and laws of campaign finance. I think if anything, it's a wake up to the commission to be more thorough in their overview and looking over the campaign's expenditures and expenses and how campaign finance funds are spent. The larger narrative for me is Republicans have always discussed this slim margin that they had in order to maintain the majority of the House, and so it seemed like people could get away with being loose with rules, being loose with ethics, and being loose in how they communicated. For me, what this is signaling to them is that there can be consequences for your action, and that they are willing to forego and to make their majority even much more slimmer in order to rise to the level when ethics are violated.
Well, and I have to do a quick follow-up on that. You mentioned the slim margins. Rick, what does it mean if Santos is expelled and ultimately if he isn't running again? What does that do to the margins for Republicans that we talk about all the time are so slim?
Well, it takes it down by one immediately, so that is obviously a seat that's going to be in play, and there almost certainly will be a special election in the coming months. Democrats held that seat until pretty recently, and in fact, the man who left that seat, Tom Suozzi, wants it back. So it's possible that that goes back to the D column in the short term, and it's going to be highly contested next fall, with New York already facing changes in its congressional district map. New York was sort of ground zero for the big Democratic losses that contributed to the loss of the House. They would love to win that Santos seat back, in addition to a couple others in that state.
I think very likely it'll go back to the Democrats.
The margin will be even slimmer, is what you're saying. Barbara,
that's right.
Rick, Christina, Mike, thank you guys so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.